Okay.
Yeah. Dear colleagues and friends, welcome to the Kranzberg Lecture. And the Kranzberg Lecture is the main event of ICOHTEC Symposia. It is delivered by distinguished scholars to honor Melvin Kranzberg with one of our founding fathers. Since Mel was a quite good organizer, he was involved in founding SHOT as well, and his approach to history was influential. He contributed fruitful to new perspectives of the history of technology in the 1960s and 70s. So far as I know, the first Kranzberg lecture was given by Angus Buchanan in Lisbon in 1998, and Paula Diogo was responsible to organize this symposium. So she was involved in planning the first Kranzberg lecture. And the Lisbon Symposium was so impressive that I decided to become an ICOHTEC member afterwards. So thank you so much, Paula. And thank you also that you took care on the Porto Symposium some years ago. And I'm very happy that you will give the Kranzberg lecture today. And now I would like to hand over to Nelson to introduce you.
Perfect, thank you, Stefan. This is a special occasion for me. I began my PhD in 2010, and it was when, thanks my friend and mentor, at that time, my PhD supervisor, Dr. Antonio Roca Rosell, I met Dr. Maria Paula Diogo. She encouraged me to go ahead with my research and later several times support my difficult way to explore my isolated topic. Today, 12 years later, I have the incredible and surprising honor to introduce her in this extremely important moment in the annual meeting 2022. We wish to be the last online of these pandemic's years. Technology-based and technology-generated decisions, our 49th Symposium of the International Committee for the History of Technology. Each symposium of ICOHTEC had a lecture named Melvin Kranzberg, one of the founders of our committee. As the society, we consider it prestigious distinction and therefore invite to lecture the most distinguished scholars. I hope they could inspire and stimulate and engage in scholarly debate throughout the meeting. Every 4 years, however, when ICOHTEC meets with the International Congress of History of Science and Technology, we enjoyed the opening lectures invited by the Congress organizers. In the list of lecturers, integrated among others by James Williams, Dagmar Schaffer, Robert Fox, Alexander Erlea, Manuel Silva Suarez, Thomas Park Hughes, Angus Buchanan. Since 1998, we have the huge privilege to listen to the second woman in the Kranzberg lecture. Dr. Maria Paula Diogo has a bachelor in history, master in historical demography, PhD in epistemology of science, history of science, and agrégation in history of technology. She teaches at the Faculty of Science and Technology, New University of Lisbon since 1986. Nowadays is full professor in history of technology at the School of Science and Technology, Nova University of Lisbon, and member of the Inter-University Center for the History of Science and Technology. She pioneered the field of history of technology in Portugal and has written extensively on the history of engineering in Portugal and its agency in the Portuguese Empire in the 19th century. She holds leadership positions in several research projects and is member of the main international research networks and scientific societies. She was awarded the Leonardo da Vinci Medal 2020 by Society for History of the Technology, SHOT. The highest recognition from this society presented to an individual who has made an outstanding contribution to the history of technology through research, teaching, publications, service to the society, and other activities. Among their research interests, we find the history of technology and engineering history in Portugal, and in this Portuguese African Empire, Angola and Mozambique, 18th and 20th century. History of science in Portugal, 18th to 20th century, and globalization of science and technology, knowledge transfer, network centers, peripheries. She has been, she had been in charge of several duties, like at the Department of Social Science and as vice coordinator in the Research Unit Center for History of Science and Technology. She teaches undergraduate and graduate courses on the history of technology and engineering and on science, technology, and society. And she publishes on a regular basis, both nationally and internationally. Maria Paula have been looking at Portuguese engineers and engineering, mainly during the second half of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. She is particularly interested in the role played by engineers in managing the territory of the Portuguese African Empire. She coordinates a national project of science, technology, and the empire, and has participated in several other projects concerning the history of Portuguese science and technology. She is a founding member of Science and Technology in the European Periphery, STEP, and of International Network of Engineering Studies, INES, and a member of Tensions of Europe, Technology, and the Making of 20th Century Europe. She served for 3 years as officers on SHOT Executive Committee. She is a member of national and international evaluation panels, including ERC grants, referee in indexed journals, and member of Ethical Advisory Board of 8 2020 research projects. After participating in the Anthropocene campus as contributor, as well as Philippe Descola, Lorraine Daston, Virginia Garcia Costa, Jürgen Wren, and Asimoes, among dozens of scholars of this same extreme high quality, Maria Paula explores hitherto new conceptual and methodological frameworks that are useful to her research on the relationship between technology, engineers, and colonial territories. And she had been deeply involved in projects like, quote, Anthropolans, construir o antropoceno, o papel da ciência, tecnologia e medicina coloniais na alteração da paisagem africana. That means Anthropolans, building the Anthropocene, the role of colonial science, technology, and medicine in altering the African landscape. In 2019, she edited the volume Gardens and Human Agency in the Anthropocene. In 2021, she co-edited the 4-volume series on the role science, technology, and medicine in Portugal. And in 2022, the volume Science, Technology, and Medicine in Lisbon. From their impressive and long list of publications, I allowed myself to choose these 3, with Tiago Saraiva, Inventing the European Nation, Engineers for Portugal, from Baroque to Fascism, with Ana Simões, Portugal, in Sloten and Numbers, and Livingston, Modern Science in National, Transnational, and Global Context, the Cambridge History of Science, Volume 8, and with Loro and Scarso, this paper, Why the Concept of Anthropocene is Relevant for Historians of Technology, published by ICON, our journal in ICOHTEC. The abstract of this paper tells us, historians of science and technology have already singled out how expertise in these fields is particularly suitable to deal with the narratives in the long durée concerning chances at the crossroads of science, technology, and the environment. We further argue that the challenges of the Anthropocene requires us deeper engagement with materiality, summoning historians and philosophers of science and technology to a wide divide in which underpinnings and effects of crucial conceptual categories, nature, society, and technology in the first place, and the subsequent disciplinary boundaries are put into question, end of quote. Please, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, we are going to listen time and human agency. How can historians of technology contribute to present-day debates? This is the Kranzberg Lecture in ICOHTEC meeting 2022 by Dr. Maria Paula Diogo. Please, my dear Maria Paula, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all. I would like to begin this talk by thanking ICOHTEC for inviting me to deliver the 2022 Kranzberg Lecture. I would like also to thank my colleague and friend, Nelson Arellano, for his kind presentation of my career, as well as to ICOHTEC's president, our colleague Stefan Poser, for his encouraging words. Although being a Kranzberg Lecturer is an honor for any historian of technology, for me, it has an additional emotional value. As Stefan mentioned, the first Kranzberg Memorial Lecture took place in Lisbon in the 1998 ICOHTEC meeting. We had the pleasure to host Melvin's widow and son in Lisbon, who were in the first row to attend Angus Buchanan's lecture. This seminal lecture was later, in 1999, so just a year after, published in ICON's 5th volume, the Journal of Our Society. Angus Buchanan chose to present an overview of Melvin Kranzberg's commitment to support an European community of historians of technology, very close and alike to the American one, gathered around the Society for the History of Technology, SHOT, he was also a mentor, but an European community able to overcome the divide between the so-called Iron Curtain countries and the West, particularly sensitive in the post-collapse of the Prague Spring. Browsing through 30 years of ICOHTEC, ICOHTEC was founded in 1968, 10 years after SHOT, Buchanan chose, and I quote, the examination of the interconnections between technology and democracy, end of quote, as his main topic. I remember this talk vividly, not only because I was organizing the meeting and the Kranzberg Memorial Lecture was a novelty, but also because I was one of Buchanan's PhD students back in the early 90s. True to Kranzberg's activism, Buchanan chose to approach technology and politics in his lecture. Today, almost a quarter of a century later, I chose to walk the same avenue, paying tribute to both Melvin Kranzberg and Angus Buchanan, and reflect how can historians of technology participate in current debates on technology and society. Last year's lecture by James Williams, who was also present in the first Kranzberg Lecture, is an excellent starting point to today's talk. And the general theme of the 2022 ICOHTEC meeting, technology-based and technology-generated decisions, is the perfect stage to discuss which decisions we are willing to hand over to technology. I will begin by briefly summarize how I built my identity as an historian of technology and how the path I took led me to my most recent research interests, which I have been developing with a multidisciplinary team within my research center, the Inter-University Center for the History of Science and Technology, hosted by both the Nova School of Science and Technology, where I'm based, and by the Faculty of Sciences of the University of Lisbon. Then I will move to some highlights concerning my recent research, and end with some conclusions. I will not be too long, as we all know that the virtual format is more difficult to follow, and I would really appreciate to have your feedback as my fellow historians of technology in the end. So let me share with you some slides. It's okay? So as an historian trained in the annals tradition, it was only natural for me to think about history, and in my case, history of technology, as a tool to discuss critical problems such as crises, migrations, war, or climate changes. I remember Febvre and Bloch's argument that history studies not only the past, but also contemporary society, and thus scholars should be inspired by the problems posed at the present time in which they lived, thought, and wrote. For the annals, the act of questioning the past from the perspective of the present had a heuristic value, as the present guided the research of the past and enriched its knowledge. This justified the defense of a relativistic concept of historical discourse, that is, the belief that each historical moment builds its representations of the past according to what matters most. If the present contributed to a better knowledge of the past, knowing the past allowed it for a better understanding of the present, and therefore resulted in a more effective action. From a methodological perspective, this past-present close relationship called for the use of the reverse method, that is, the historian starts from the present to trace the thread of time back to the societies of the past. The purpose of the annals was not to break the links between the past already legitimized and the present that still needed legitimation, but to empower the historical discourse of the political imperatives of the present and re-articulate the historian's relations to the past. In this context, Bloch and Febvre enlarged and justified the territory of history, explaining why the past was relevant for present times and why contemporaneity was also part of history. The annals concept of time is rooted in an ontological perspective in which time is the place for the intelligibility of history, that is, of individual and collective actions. Annals concept of time strongly opposes the idea of time as a chronological and linear order of events, autonomous in relation to individual and phenomena. This innovative concept presented by the annals of time is clearly used in Febvre's fierce criticism both to the concept of precursor, which is very common in history of science and technology and is defined as someone who is ahead of his time, and this fierce criticism also to anachronism. Febvre's and Bloch's plea to strengthen explicitly the history of science and the history of technology within the so-called mentalities did not find a strong echo or following in the post-war annals. For historians of science, the annals programs also remained for a long time in the shadow. But for historians of technology, it became part of its foundational agenda. The Society for the History of Technology, Melvin Kranzberg laws, and the journal Technology and Culture are a clear testimony of this legacy, and the fact the annals was embraced as our paradigm. And this leads me to the second influence, Melvin Kranzberg works. Kranzberg received his undergraduate degree in history and economics, his master's and doctoral degrees in French history from Harvard. His dissertation on the Siege of Paris had little to do with technology, of course, but introduced Kranzberg in the French Second Empire, when France began to industrialize significantly, and led him to a growing interest in the process of industrialization. Equally important, Kranzberg's PhD thesis made him aware of the pioneering studies of the Annales schools of French historians, especially and precisely Marc Bloch and Lucien Febvre. Their innovative approach to history, to time and to geography, and their interest in the material world shaped Kranzberg's view on the connections between material factors and culture, thus leading him to design his model for the history of technology that most of us continue to follow. Significantly, the Journal of the Society for the History of Technology was named Technology and Culture, not just technology or just history of technology, but technology and culture, thereby emphasizing the fact that culture shapes technology as much as technology shapes culture. In his presidential address, Melvin Kranzberg was Schott's president in 1983 and 84. He mentions that Eugene Ferguson, a leading figure in the history of technology that I'm sure all of us know, wrote him a note in which he stated, "Each of us has only one message to convey." Applying his friend's only one message motto, Kranzberg summarized his 6 laws as being the epitome of his conviction that technology is an integral part of human history that is always created by human society and shaped by time and space. A third influence came later, when I became an active member of 2 independent research networks, which coexisted in time from 1999 to 2014. Science Technology in the European Periphery, for short STEP, and Tensions of Europe, sometimes also for short TOE. They were also critical to my understanding and practice of history. Let me briefly remind you of STEP's and TOE's contributions. They have different, albeit complementary approaches to the history of technology and history of science, both encouraging national case studies and their relation to a larger regional, transnational, and/or European framework. So space, time, and human agency are at the core of their frameworks. STEP's agenda stressed the concepts of appropriation, circulation, mediation, and innovation, and was particularly concerned with the historicization of the notion of European periphery. Approaching local studies under such theoretical umbrella, it is possible to reinforce the concept of co-construction of centers and peripheries and go beyond the corset of fixed geographies. It is also possible to bring to the forefront the perspective of the active receiver, often dismissed from a global accounts based on a simplistic and static divide between the active global north and the passive global south. And finally, to fully participate on the ongoing debate on the relevance of science and technology as a global phenomena, closely related to the discussion of progress itself, the concept of progress itself. Topics such as experts, amateurs, go-betweens, travels and circulation, popularization and its various medium, textbooks, techno-political agendas have been under STEP scrutiny. After the end of STEP in 2014, mobilities and urban space research have profited from a discussion informed by STEP's rationale, often put forward by former STEP members. Together, they have proved to be fertile territories for historical research that is relevant to the challenges that Europe and the world faces today. The Tensions of Europe Research Network built on 2 main conceptual tools. The idea of a hidden technological-driven agenda for European integration, as opposed to the explicit economic, financial, and political integrative policies, and the notions of linking and delinking, which explore the ever-changing symmetries and asymmetries within Europe and between Europe and global world. The 4 main assumptions that supported the research framework of the first Tensions of Europe program, which was Inventing Europe, Technology and the Making of Europe, 19th century to the present, and which gave way to the Making Europe 6 volumes book series, were first the long-duration narrative, second the relevance of material networks, technological systems, and circulation of knowledge, practices, and artifacts, third the need for placing the histories of Europe and histories in the plural in a global worldwide dynamic perspective, and fourth the need to review the current understanding of the process of European integration in order to highlight its bottom-up dimensions and its tensions. Beyond its research agenda, Tensions of Europe encourage a strong commitment to contemporary issues, claiming the relevance of history of technology in the discussion of topics usually labeled as political or economic, and in proposing solutions to citizens and policymakers. In this context, it is only natural that the follow-up from the first Tensions of Europe program, which started in 2016, encompasses a new ongoing research agenda, technology and the making of Europe societal challenges, geared towards the big issues of our time, particularly those related, for instance, to the concept of crisis. This is still uncharted territory for historians of technology, insofar as technology has not been placed at the center of the current analysis, for instance, of crisis. It is therefore a tantalizing research avenue for historians of technology to understand how societal crises are shaped and or mediated by technology. It is at the crossroads of these influences, the revisitation of the annals and of Kranzberg's views on the relationship between technology and society, and STEP and Tensions of Europe conceptual frameworks, that I highlight the topics of crisis and Anthropocene as research areas worthy of attention of historians of technology, and stress how they reason with historians' tools of time and human agency. I believe that both conceptual debates and archival research on these topics promise challenging results and show how humanities, in this case history of technology and history of science, may be relevant assets in discussion going on in present society in topics such as resources, migrations, security, water, food, urban challenges, mobility, pandemics, war, climate justice, and environment. They are usually labeled as just political or economic, or even technical, but it is evident that a multidisciplinary input encompassing reflections on the role of science and technology is critical in order to propose solutions to citizens and policymakers. Let me now focus on the topics I chose to illustrate my argument concerning the importance of using time and human agency as conceptual tools to unpack mainstream narratives on the Anthropocene and on crisis. As you all know, the concept of Anthropocene has become a kind of a buzzword after the atmospheric chemist and Nobel laureate Paul Crutzen popularized it in 2000. From then on, meetings, publications, journals, blogs, and even the discussion of new educational formats, for instance, the Anthropocene curriculum and the Anthropocene campuses, led by the Haus der Kultur in der Welt and the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science, have blossomed. There are few doubts that technology and science are at the core of the Anthropocene. Technological events and devices, the Neolithic Revolution, the Columbian Exchange based on European ability to control the seas, James Watt's steam machine and the beginning of the British Industrial Revolution, the 1945 Trinity nuclear test explosion, and the post-Second World War acceleration are the different landmarks proposed to date the moment in which humanity began changing nature significantly, from the perspective of the social sciences. I first engaged in the discussion on the Anthropocene by analyzing the concept of technosphere as approached by Peter Huff, that is, as a realm created by humans to serve human purposes, but that had, and I quote, a quasi-autonomous dynamics, tending to complete escape human control. As an historian of technology, this idea was deeply disturbing because it echoed strongly technological determinism, it had no specific historical actors, and it had no time in it. So yes, I was horrified, and the only thing that crossed my mind was that the concept called for an emergency action by historians of technology. So suddenly, I was involved in this challenging discussion in which I proposed to approach the Anthropocene and the adjacent concept of crisis by bringing time, and specifically the longue durée, into the analysis. And by bringing the longue durée, the underlying determinism and the lack of historical actors were also tackled, of course. Technology, better yet, technological objects, machines, factories, computers, cars, buildings, railways, power, mobility, energy and communication infrastructures exist within a specific historical context and are part of an entangled global and hierarchized history that includes knowledge, culture, economy, and politics. And thus, technology is never free-floating and cannot be considered the key governing force in society. So, by historicizing the concept of technosphere, historians of technology deconstruct its major argument in favor of the idea that technology determines history, which is based on a doctrine of progress centralized around the idea that society's problems can always be solved by technological advancement, including the now infamous technofixes, which were being discussed in the last session precisely. This understanding is crucial for the discussion on the Anthropocene because it unveils the DNA of the concept of technosphere, which is being outside human history, offering a view on human society if it is an homogeneous, free, flat and free-floating reality. Let me just give a couple of recent examples of this kind of argument as it is conveyed to the public in general. Now, the narrative goes like this. We, and I really want to stress here the we have a problem with excess CO2, for instance. What do? We find a technical solution. For instance, the Orca project in Ireland, which is direct air capture of CO2 by giant fans and its storage through underground mineralization. So the we is not questioned. The economic system leading to the excess CO2 is not questioned. And the possible consequences of the solution are not questioned. Because if things turn to the worse, technology will find a way to solve the problem, even if that means leaving the Earth and going to Mars. And I would dare here to raise the question on the causes of this recent interest on travels to Mars by private investors, such as Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. But we could also look at Venice and the Mose project to defend the lagoon territory from increasingly frequent and intense high water, while promoting waves of massive boats for tourism in the Mediterranean, or the creation of a new superenzyme that eats plastic bottles 6 times faster than the previous bacteria that naturally evolved the ability to eat plastic, instead, of course, of decreasing the quantity of plastic used on an everyday basis. So these examples are common in the mainstream narratives on the Anthropocene and demonstrate very clearly a dehistoricized perception of the concept. That is, human agency, which is translated in the economic and political systems, dissolves into this very generic narrative, which oscillates between Jean-Jacques Rousseau's mystification of nature and George Orwell's dystopia of omnipresent technological surveillance. However, a growing number of authors from very different fields of expertise, in which the Lisbon Research Group is included, question this approach that uses humanity as a whole, intentionally leveling socioeconomic differences and concealing political conflicts and interests. In this context, alternative concepts to describe the so-called age of humankind have been proposed, particularly by stressing the role played by different forms of capitalism, including so-called state capitalism, in the unbridled exploitation of natural resources, thus bringing to the forefront the divide between those who explore and those who are explored. And we have here some examples of these new concepts. Colonial and post-colonial studies also respond to this criticism by discussing how European colonial science, technology and medicine anchored a new global worldwide epistemology and ideas of progress and growth that profoundly changed the very concept of ecology, both in colonial and post-colonial periods. I argue that there is lots of room for historians of technology to participate and help to reinforce the human dimension in the present narratives on the Anthropocene by following the changes in natural and human landscapes through the use of science and technology as a dispositive, that is, as a heterogeneous ensemble of mechanisms that enforce and reinforce power over nature, framed by economic and political objectives, that is, turning the we into historical actors. In my view, the relevant question concerning time and the Anthropocene is not the building of a chronology of events or the discussion of its starting point, but the addition of temporality of a long-term perspective to the discussion in order to seize the intertwined movements of different historical scales and actors' agencies. As historians of technology of science, but same applies to philosophers and sociologists of science and technology, it is our responsibility to encourage an historicized account of the Anthropocene. In this context, the Lisbon Research Group has been developing a new concept to dissect the nature-culture technology dichotomy and help to reassess the nature of nature, which is central to the Anthropocene debate. And this is the concept of loopend nature. It is obvious that we build on an analogy to the Marxist concept of loopend proletariat in order to highlight the demise of nature as an independent entity and to stress its constitutive technological dimension. The concept of loopend nature also builds on John Bellamy Foster's Marxist-driven notion of metabolic rift, that is, Marx's analysis of the alienation of nature within dynamics between human beings and nature that result from human labor. Soil fertility, for example, is described by Marx not as a natural quality of the soil, but rather the result of how soil was used within specific social relations of a certain time. This kind of complex metabolic relations between humans and non-humans highlight the dual and therefore subject to tensions character of these interactions that encompass both nature and human agencies. To seize this troubled interplay, historians and philosophers of technology have been using extensively the concepts of naturalization of technology and technologization of nature. In the shadow of these two concepts that we use a lot, and that actually place technology always as the driven force of the relationship, either by imposing itself as a second nature and reclaiming its status as a form of life, or by domesticating and controlling nature, by transforming landscapes and ecosystems into sources of supply on local and global scales. So behind this idea of naturalization of technology and technologization of nature lurks an often dismissed assumption that is particularly relevant in the discussion on the Anthropocene. To naturalize technology, turning a human-generated process in one characterized as a set of unstoppable forces in motion beyond human control is actually to deny human agency. And by denying human agency, the human origins and differentiated consequences of the Anthropocene are swept under the carpet, rendering the entangled histories of economic systems, political decisions, social asymmetries, and technological solutions opaque. It is having this context in mind that we propose to go a step further and introduce the notion of technological nature. By this new concept, we mean artificial and digital representations of the wild that fulfill our inborn affiliations with the environment without engaging with nature and thus allowing for its destruction. Programs on wildlife while destroying the existing natural habitats, creating more perfect waves to substitute the natural sounds, but also decreasing global warming by putting deflectors in Earth's orbit, or not changing the reasons for the reasons for the warming of the planet. Ocean iron fertilization technologies and developing genetically modified crops instead of solving global asymmetries in food distribution chains. This new technological nature, and for those who are into sci-fi, movies such as Total Recall and The Matrix immediately come to mind. This technological nature is a lupin nature, deprived of its primal values and inherently framed by technology. We are aware that this technological nature contaminates the essence of what has been perceived until now as the true nature, eventually leading to its dissolution as a category. We are reminded of American environmentalist Bill McKibben's statement in his book, The End of Nature. We have deprived nature of its independence, and this is fatal to its meaning. Nature's independence is its meaning. Without it, there is nothing but us. And we have here the cover of the famous Environments by Tybal and Gertzman, in which the sounds of waves result from a pioneer electronically processed recording of the ocean loop, and which is very commonly used to enlighten this idea. At the same time, the absence of human agency is being discussed by our fellow historian of technology, Rosalind Williams, concerning the concept of crisis. The rhetoric and discourses on crisis and the aftermath of crisis becomes more relevant in the 20th century, particularly in the interwar period, and are rooted in a wider sense of loss and frustration, very much based on the perception that the human ability to command nature does not lead necessarily to increasing well-being, and that the resources are indeed finite. Of course, this is not new in academic discussions among historians of technology. The debate on technological pessimism and skepticism is a simple yet effective reminder, as well as Kranzberg's first law, technology is neither good nor bad, nor it is neutral, that trade-offs are usually part of the relationship between humans, nature, and society and technology. However, the idea of linear, continuous, and good growth and progress, which is at the heart of industrial capitalism, is still a doxa, in the sense that for most people, this constructed vision appears to be the only possible vision of reality. After World War II, this sense of loss and frustration evolved to a slightly different concept, the so-called slow-moving crisis, which is, in fact, and as Rosalind Williams points out, an oxymoron, as crises are supposed to be sharp and decisive turning points. So the question of will this crisis really ever be over was raised over and over again and applied in multiple scenarios: economy, politics, demography, war, natural disasters, and more recently, public health. But again, and as already pointed out for the concept of technosphere, and I share Rosalind Williams' take on this, one of the major consequences of applying the concept of a slow-moving crisis is also to naturalize a human-generated process, characterizing them as unstoppable forces beyond human control. That is, and again, as for the technosphere and the Anthropocene, to deny human agency and to deny time. And by denying human agency and time, again, the human origins and differentiated consequences of crises all over the planet are swept under the carpet, and again, the entangled histories of economy, politics, social asymmetries, and technological solutions become once again opaque. Once again, the we is not questioned, the economic system that creates the conditions for the crisis is not questioned, and the actors involved in the crisis and their roles are not identified And it creates this kind of rolling apocalypse, a term used by Rosalind Williams, becomes the normal condition until it eventually reached the no turning point. And I would like to conclude, as an historian of technology, whose work has been focused on the 19th century, as my colleague Nelson Arellano mentioned, on Portuguese engineers and the African Empire during the 19th century, I never forgot, however, Bloch's and Febvre's claim that contemporaneity is part of history, and historians should enlarge and engage in nowadays academic and public debates. I think the concept of Anthropocene, which I know still leaves lots of historians uncomfortable and even suspicious, and I was one of them, I must say in the beginning, is really a challenging platform for revisiting the tools of our métier, using them in different contexts, organizing them in different geometries, and discussing with an open mind if the concept is useful as a historical category, if the concept is useful for us, historians of technology, historians of environment, historians of science. Likewise, I believe historians of technology may contribute in a very relevant way to fine-tuning the rationale behind the Anthropocene by using our own analytical tools, particularly the concept of time and human agency and other concepts, to dissect some of the assumptions behind the concept of Anthropocene and enrich it with our expertise. The relevance of local contexts, transnational expertise and objects, colonialism and imperialism are just a few examples of topics to be replaced. The recognition of the dire impact of asymmetries on present-day problems calls for solutions involving an ample participation of diverse constituencies. Many questions are out there to be answered. The whose Anthropocene, whose crisis? Are we talking about Europe, the United States, South America, Africa? This leads to a huge discussion. How are problems enacted, entangled, and built across time and space? How do different actors perceive, use, mediate, and shape their interaction? Where does power really lies? And I will end by again quoting Melvin Kranzberg. When he was called to intervene in the debate on technological determinism, Kranzberg clarified his support to Lynn White's claim that technology only opens the door and it is up to us to enter or not, by pointing out a set of additional questions, and I quote, "True, one is not compelled to enter White's open door, but an open door is an invitation. Besides, who decides which doors to open? And once one has entered the door, and not one's future direction, are not one's future directions guided by the contours of the corridor or chamber into which one has stepped? And equally important, once one has crossed the threshold, can one turn back?" So the questions are out there to be answered also by us, historians of technology, and particularly by the younger generation. So thank you, and I am now available for the discussion.
So, well, effectively,